If you're joining us online, we're just going to test some audio levels while folks are coming in. So bear with us, please. You have it on there? You step out. Thank you. I'm going to use this mic first. This is the handheld mic. And then I have another one, but I don't know. I'll choose this one tonight. Yeah, right? Where's it at? I'll just read Esther. Test 1, 2, 3. I should probably keep talking. Are you getting anything? Say it again. See, I thought there was, and I was getting it on OSB or OBS. You see it right here? Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Thanks for with us. I'm going to try this mic to see if this is better or not. I don't even know where to put this thing. Like up here? I should have kept my clergy shirt on, which had a pocket. Something like that. Is that better or not? We'll see. It'll take a while. Is it? Oh, that's because I didn't mute the other one. That's my fault. Do this and adjust this a little bit like that. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C. Nope, the wrong one, Josh. Bring this down. I feel like a stand-up comic. I'll just wait a little bit longer. Ooh, why is it cycling? Womp, womp, womp. Okay, now it's to be okay. It says it's green. I'm going to... You are so patient. Thank you. Test. So, good. Good. We'll see. I know it's going to take a while to catch up with that on. Okay. Woohoo! Great. Yay. It's so spiritual. Okay, so, yeah. What I had copied, though, was out of this Atlas of the Bible. It's by Carl Rasmussen, and it's about the exile and return, which, just full disclosure, right, I don't know a whole lot about. And I've found this to be true in my own life. I don't know if you found it to be true in yours. I have read the entire Bible, and I'm not bragging. I'm just by way of relaying information. And I've read the entire Bible probably 3 times. But then when I was reading stuff in here about Ezekiel, for example, which we're not in, I was like, well, I've never studied Ezekiel, And are you? Okay, so there's interesting portions you get to when it comes to certain parts of the Bible, and I'm like, I'm a little rusty on my Ezekiel theology, or I haven't looked at Isaiah in 10 years. And so I had that moment this afternoon when I was preparing, and I was just thinking about how parts of the Bible are so good to come back and revisit and to sit with again and again. So tonight we're going to continue with Esther. We'll be in chapter 5. It's rather short, and so we'll also hop into chapter 6. This is the first time we will attempt to read 2 chapters in one night. And then probably the same for next week. We'll probably read 7 and 8. 8's a little bit longer, so we'll see. And in particular, I didn't have a whole lot of particular things that I wanted to circle back on, but I have some things that I think are interesting. All I have to say is I don't have any, of archaeology stuff and maps and all of that, because I think what's more interesting are the themes in the chapters this evening. And so I wanted to mix it up in that regard a little bit. And also, this is funny, just pastor world, I prepared this 3 weeks ago. And so I got back from vacation, and I was like, where was I? What did I even read? And I had to reread it again. And then I was like, why did I prepare ahead of time if I had to come back and reread it? So that was interesting. Yeah, it was good. It was good to sit with it. So, a boom stand. I'll see if it holds it. Might be better. But I feel like a stand-up comedian this way. I could tell favorite jokes. Where does George Washington keep his armies? In his sleeveys. All right? Oh, it's so okay. Thanks. I'll keep telling until she brings me another mic stand. It's so good. Okay. No. I believe you will. Is it appropriate? Well, I don't know if I trust you. Is it appropriate? You see, the bishop can't fire you, right? But no. Oh, that's good. Yeah, he doesn't believe there's a dog. That's good. That's fair. That one's that's okay. That's good. All right. Well, we will. Thank you. I appreciate you holding that. This is rated PG. Sometimes we dip into PG-13. So I believe you. I would laugh. It's true. All right, so let's hop in a little bit. It's so good to be with you all. I missed you, believe it or not, and I missed studying on Wednesday. And it's been so good for my soul to get into the Word a little bit, to get into Scripture, and to unpack it and wrestle with it. So we've been talking about Esther for a few weeks. Esther chapter 1 is Queen Vashti defies the king. Chapter 2 is the beauty contest to find a queen. Chapter 3 is Haman and anti-Semitism. Chapter 4 is Mordecai and Esther agree to help. And so that's where we've been, and now we're going to hop into 5 and 6. But before we do, shall we pause for a word of prayer? Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for small things like YouTube and a projector and a microphone and your word and your Holy Spirit. And we're thankful for each other and this opportunity. The fact that we get to sit and read and wrestle with something is fascinating. And so, Lord, I ask that your Spirit would come and guide us, that your Spirit would transform our conversation, that we would see things come alive in the text, and that we would question it with holy reverence for this evening. Praise all in your Son's name. Amen. All right. So, we're going to talk about previously on Esther, and then we're going to, that one looks like it might fit. That'd be great. And then what we'll do is we'll just read 5 and 6. I'll bring my guitar next week. Yeah, right. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Welcome to the podcast. Like and subscribe, right? I don't know if I can do this backwards. There's no way. All right. Previously on Esther 4, verses 14 through 17. It says, and if mine differs from up there, you're going to forgive me. I just have a neck that only goes in one direction. For, if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you've come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I'll go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. All right, Esther 5, and we'll read 1 through 8. And then we'll take up the other portion. We'll read 6. We'll cut it in half, I think. 1 through 11. We'll take 12 to the end. Esther 5, verse 1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne inside the palace, opposite the entrance to the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to half of my kingdom. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I prepared for the king. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther desires. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther said, this is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I'll do as the king has said. Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and observed that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Then he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the ministers of the king. Haman added, even Queen Esther, let no one but myself come with the king to the banquet that she prepared. Tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this does me no good, so long as I see the Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the banquet in good spirits. Now this advice pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Pretty high. It's a lot of cubits. Chapter 6. Oh my goodness, I am doing a bad job, aren't I? There we go. Now available in super small font. Chapter 6. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of records, the annals, and they were read to the king. It was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." The king said, "Who's in the court?" Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So the king's servants told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." The king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor?" Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, with a royal crown on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Quickly, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to the Jew Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you've mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, and robed Mordecai, and led him riding through the open square of the city, proclaiming, "Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared. The plot does thicken. All right, so we have a good amount of time. We might be done early, but I have some notes to work through, and I'm curious, as you were looking through this, what struck your attention or caught your eye, or questions might you have, or thoughts? Okay, so what goes around comes around. Say a little more about that. Okay, so there is, and I don't know if y'all heard what she said, so that Haman had planned something for Mordecai, and the king also planned something for Mordecai. And there is this theme of, you could say, scheming, right? And a theme of planning. There's a lot of plans in play in these two chapters. So let's not abstract them, but let's extract them from the text. What are the background plans, and who are the quarterbacks of these plans? Because there's, I think, 3 or 4 immediately. But what do you see? Let's name them. Okay, so we have Haman, and I wish we could kind of draw it out here, but we have Haman plotting against Mordecai specifically. What other plans are scheming in the background? Or Haman did. You're right. No, thank you for saying it. So another in the background is Haman's plan for genocide. So there's 2 others. Esther has a plan to intercede on behalf or to save. Other plans? Thank you. Yep, the king's plan to honor Mordecai. Mordecai trying to influence the king. Yes, and you feel that tension, right? I don't know if y'all heard that. That the king has a plan to honor Mordecai. Simultaneously, he's okay to plan to kill all of his people. Yeah, there's this tension. Something that came to mind, and I'll just share, is there's a great moral question or ethical question to think about is, can one be in power and not get blood on your hands? It's kind of an age-old question, right? Could you be president of the United States and not get blood on your hands? Could you? Well, right, yeah, no, I would say most rulers have. How does one honor God's commands and govern justly? Now, that's just something just to think about. I'm not saying that Ahasuerus or Xerxes or Artaxerxes or whatever this Persian king is, that he adheres to any morals or ethics. But here he is in the story, right? Trying to do the right thing, you could say, trying to honor someone, and then also simultaneously murdering everybody. It's just an interesting duality that we see in the story. Yes. Yeah, he's not the evil genius, right? But he is, because that's Haman. Haman is the evil genius in the story, and King Ahasuerus or Xerxes is the pawn as a king, right? He's the manipulatable one, or malleable. Yeah. Wishy-washy. He can't decide what he wants to do. He has no moral spine of his own. Those are the schemes, which is really interesting. There's 4 or 5 parallel plans. There's some good alliteration there. Some parallel plans, and I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's this idea of timing in the story of Esther. So, okay, we talked about the plans. What else did you see in 5 and 6? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about that dynamic a little bit. One is his response, which you mentioned. His response is that ask whatever you want, and if it's half my kingdom, that's fine. I'll give you half my kingdom. Right? Okay, so let's just be honest there that there are ways to read that. Right? You could read it literally, and say that the king literally means what he says, and that if she did ask for half of his kingdom, he would have given it to her. There's also another way to read that, and that's as a metaphor, right? Audrey had you tracking with me. This is when you said, like, baby, if you wish for the moon, I'll give you the moon, We ain't got the power to go grab the moon, It's a metaphor. It's like, honey, whatever you want. You want diamonds for Christmas, I'll get you diamonds. It might be a really, really tiny diamond, but I can do that, right? Or some CZ, or whatever. So it's a metaphor. I think it's just important to recognize that, right? Because oftentimes, and we've talked about this before in here, when we encounter the Bible, there are things in the Bible that we should read literally. And my go-to is when Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I do not think it's a metaphor. I think Jesus is literally challenging us to do that. But there are other things that we read in Scripture that are I can't even say clearly metaphorical, because people can argue about it. But this is a great example because it's not a moral command, and so it's easy to think about this and this tension that we have as believers when we open the Bible, right? Am I making sense? Okay. Yeah, and we've talked about this parallel between the Davidic story and Solomon and that family, and then Saul and David, and the connection to the Esther story
And there's a lot of, you can't say parallels, they're like echoes of that narrative that we've heard before. And I just want to be blunt here. I think that the biblical writers do this on purpose. You know? It's like when you're telling your grandkids a story or your kids a story, and you're like, and it's basically Daniel in the Lion's Den or David and Goliath. Like, the story of David and Goliath has been played out over and over and over and over again. It might be the big school downtown versus the tiny upstart rival. That's David and Goliath. You know, it might be the British Empire versus the American colonists. That's David and Goliath. They're just these echoes, and they're meant to tell us the story. So I think this idea of they hear Saul and his inability to govern well, and they hear the story of Ahasuerus and his inability to govern well. They're like, I know how this is going to end. It's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of thing. It's subtle. Thoughts? Maybe we're just chewing on that. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in Esther, because there are themes in particular in Esther 5 and 6. And I just want to say some of these here. So the king gives her either this proverbial saying, ask me for whatever you want up to half my kingdom and I'll give it to you. Or he literally means it. Either way, I don't think it matters. But he says, Esther, what do you want? And what does she do? We're going to go back to 5 here. Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. She's buttering him up. Okay, so why? You think that she's kind of not leading him on, but buttering him up or wooing him to this idea? Other thoughts? I don't think you're wrong. I just think, let's put on different hats. And what are different ways to read? What's her stratagem? Or what's the theological interpretation? Okay, here we go. Right, there's different ways to look at this. I don't know if y'all heard. Right, maybe God's working in the background. What else? What are others? What do you think? Yeah. So maybe this is a very human moment in Esther where you see it. It's like, like when we were all kids, you knew which parent to go talk to. Can I borrow the car and go out with my friends? It's like, I'm not asking Dad. I'm going to go ask Mom. No, then you'll get caught. You'll get caught. Okay, so maybe this is a very human moment, and we see Esther knows that she has a plan, but maybe it's not the right time. I think that's a really good way to look at it. You could also look at it as, say, the plan is God's plan, and it will be enacted in God's time. I think that's a fair way to read this. Dude, yeah. Yeah, here, you take this for a little bit. You thought, yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. The whole entire story is about timing. Even the very last chapter is about holy time and Purim and the festival, which all takes place at a particular time. So it's a huge theme in the story of Esther, and when is the right time for these things to occur or happen? When is the right time to approach the king with the plan? And it's not yet. And then you might say, well, Esther, come on, that's your plan, and you guys agreed. Go. And then she might have been talking with the king and said, maybe not yet. There's some wisdom there, right? Which is also the author of Esther is using irony in the story, right? We get Haman's inner thoughts, which doesn't happen with a whole lot of the other characters, but it literally says, where is it? You'll help me find it. Where it says Haman said to himself. It's in chapter 6. Yep. 6 verse 6. Yeah, Haman said to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? Which is a brilliant insight. But notice, right, we should just be aware that we don't necessarily get Esther's thoughts yet. The author is either not privy to them, doesn't know them, or doesn't want us to know them as a way for us to enter into these questions about Esther's motives, Esther's timing. Haman is, I don't want to say he's a two-dimensional villain, but we just had a good insight into his personality that he is clearly selfish. Clearly selfish. And so the author is an evil, pure evil. And that's, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you're exactly right. Yeah, he's Jafar, the evil vizier. This is at the end of 5:14. It says, this advice pleased Haman, and he had the pole made. So there's no qualms about it. His intention is to murder, let me use a political term, execute, right, Mordecai. And so it's not even a storytelling mechanic. He has the pole made. So let's do a little bit of historicity around that. What did the Bible say, or what did the Bible read? The height was 50 cubits, is that right? So, I was like, I know ancient measurements. No, I don't. And a cubit is debated. So it's about the height of your finger to the end of your elbow. And of course men come in one size. Right? But this makes sense, the more and more we think about it. There's other ancient measurements in the Bible, like a rod. It'll say a rod's length, and you're like, oh yeah, I got one of those in the linen closet. But if you think about it, if you're on a building site, right, and you're going to build a house, and you want to make the room somewhat square, you're going to find a length of something, cut it, and that's your jig, and you say, okay, all the bricks that you all are going to stamp out, don't make them any longer than this, and don't make them any shorter, otherwise this house ain't going to work. And then you hand the jig over, and then that rod. So that's the folklore behind what is a foot. A foot was the measurement from heel to toe of one of the King of England's feet. He was a giant, I don't know. So that was, so that's sort of the tall tale behind that. So a cubit makes sense, if it's from here to here. Okay, well then I'm going to make the door frame 3 cubits tall, or 10 cubits tall, or you name it. But then that's your measurement. And then you don't need to go get a jig. You got one on your body. So I did some more research, and I'll just read this. I thought it was interesting. So a cubit, he's told to make it 50 cubits tall. That'd be 75 feet, about a 6-story building. The English use of cubit is difficult to determine, according to this dictionary. It says the exact length of this measurement varies, depending upon whether it included the entire length from the elbow to the tip of the longest finger, or by one of the alternatives described. Some scholars suggest that the longer dimension was the original cubit, yada, 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 a sacred cubit, yada, 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 a standard cubit, yada, 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 so on and so forth. And then there are same dimensions found for Egyptian measurements. which I thought was an important detail because we know the Egyptians were builders, and where did the Hebrew people spend a lot of their time? In Egypt. And so a lot of these things are absorbed in the culture. Okay, so that's my excursus on cubits.
I have a notation here. It says, this cube, 7.5-story structure, was too large for the small statue, but it would be easily visible to miles. The purpose was to destroy the stubborn, uncooperative Jews and put his corpse on display for the entire world to see. All to the generation.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. Regardless of the pole, whether it is 70 feet tall, 60, 50, 40, whatever, it is meant to humiliate. And what I thought was interesting was some of the words about gallows in the translation, and I felt that was a little anachronistic. Are you familiar with this term, anachronistic? Anachronistic would be like to read back into things that are modern. Right. Yeah, we think of like gallows and we think of like the hangman's noose and all that. Oh, they didn't have hangman, they didn't. So it could have been, we've talked about this, it could have been an impaling pole. It could have been some sort of pole on a city wall, 70 feet up. It could have been on top of a hill. Just different things to consider when we read a text. How'd you get them on top, right? Yeah, that's a big old ladder. Yeah. Right.
It also says the word gallows may refer to a wooden pole. Persons were not executed with a rope around the neck, rather than impaled for whipping on the tree.
Yes. Yeah, and I won't go into the details of impaling. We did talk about it, though, I think in week 1 or 2, but not pleasant. Not pleasant. Not instant death. So, okay. What else do you see in chapters 5 and 6? It leaves you hanging. It's a good story. But that's something to note, right? And we've talked about this. The genre of Esther could be court romance or court intrigue. It reads differently than Genesis. It reads differently than the book of Numbers or Leviticus or Deuteronomy. It reads differently than the Psalms. And it reads differently than Isaiah or Jeremiah. And so it's another good reminder that not every book in the Bible reads the same. Some are more narrative than others. Some are compiled by editors. Esther's got some good narrative flow to it. And I won't get into things like textual criticism, but I will for a second if you'll bear with me. I don't want to lose too many of you, but y'all are familiar with textual criticism. We've talked about it just a little bit. So I'm going to dig down about a foot, and then I'm going to stop. Because if we go too deep, I will fall asleep. Okay? But textual criticism, and I'll use the book of Genesis as an example, is when you look at the Hebrew, if someone always uses the word Elohim for God, that's probably how they understand God. If someone always uses the word Yahweh for God, those are two different words. And they do not necessarily mean the same thing. And if someone uses a different word for God, like I'll just say Adonai, which means Lord, then you have 3 different words for God. And so in theory, you could say that if I'm an author and I'm writing something down, and I always write Jennifer, my wife, right? Okay, that is how the author understands that person. If I always write down the word Jen, I never call her Jenny. But you know who always calls her Jenny? Is her dad. So like whenever you find something in the house and it says Jenny on it, who's it from? It's from her dad. It's never from me. Right? So the same way in the Bible, if you always find something with the word Elohim but never Adonai, maybe it's the same author. And in Genesis, there is this theory, and this goes to textual criticism, that these words are written by different people and that those are different authors. I have not done a whole lot of textual criticism. I'm probably going to stop here in a second. I have not done a whole lot of textual criticism on Esther, But my understanding is that the text as a whole is pretty coherent, that there's not a whole lot of variation in the Hebrew. And that's why it reads like a story. It's very fluid, and you could say the text is rather preserved. That's the word you would use. Thoughts about that? Kind of interesting. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are generally seen as two different creation narratives. And that's because of textual criticism. Which is just an interesting subcategory of biblical study. But you can go get a PhD in this if you really want to. So that's why I promise we just dig down a little bit and then we stop. Because I don't have that sort of training. I have enough to be dangerous, they would say. I need to stick to my notes or we won't get done early, And the Astros first pitch is at 8 o'clock. So I wanted to say, all right, in this, I know, they're throwing up goose eggs. They're terrible. Okay, I wanted to get back to this section right here, and you'll notice in chapter 5, verses 9 through 14, my notes I wrote down, you can see Haman's deep-seated insecurities and how he has a need to be honored by everybody, right? He's ticked off that Mordecai doesn't, honor him the way he expects to be honored. And I had some more things to say about that. Nope, that's in verse 6. We'll get there. But it's somewhat related, so we'll come back to that. No, let's go there now. Thanks for bearing with me. So in chapter 6, the king cannot sleep very well. Which, I don't know how you want to interpret that, but this is what I wrote down in my notes. I said, well, I don't know, right? Maybe he's already seen Esther. Maybe he's thinking about Esther. But what I wrote down, to get my mind out of the gutter, I'm kidding. I wrote down, all of his achievements could not help him sleep well. And I just thought this came to me, I was thinking about this, that this king is the most powerful person in the entire realm. We've seen him not be the most ethically concerned. So I doubt he's up at night with some sort of crisis of consciousness, I think rather he just can't sleep. And he's, he calls in someone to read the books about all of his achievements. He still can't sleep. He's like, I should have probably honored that one guy. I guess I'll do that. Add it to the agenda for next meeting. But what I thought was interesting is, it's just a reminder, was that there's an old adage, is that this is from St. Augustine, I think. Oh, don't quote me on that. Sorry, you don't even know what I'm going to say. Here's the quote, right? Is that your soul is restless until it finds rest in God. And I think it's St. Augustine. But that's what came to mind with this whole entire passage of the king, is he is restless. And he's restless because, in my opinion, right, no matter what you do, whatever you achieve, no matter how good you are to the world, if you are not right with God, it does not matter. And so here's the king, tormented by not enough. I should do more. I should achieve more. I should conquer more. I should rule better. I don't know. Here's the thought I had. How do you read his restlessness? Interesting. Yeah, good eyes. Yeah. Okay, so I did write down timing on here. This is in verse 5. I said, why does Haman not act? I wrote down God's timing, human scheming. Why does Esther not act? Was she intimidated? Was it not the right time? We'll come to the very end in a second. But before we do that, let's talk about timing. And we've talked about this again and again, that God's proper name or God's name in general is not mentioned in the book of Esther. And here we are talking about God's timing. And the whole entire book, as we've already mentioned, leads up to Purim, a holy festival, which is God's time. I'll branch into Greek a little bit here for a second. I know it's outside of the scope of Esther. Maybe you've heard this. We get our word for time from the Greek word chronos. It's where you get like chronological order or chronology, the study of time. A chronographer is someone who works on timepieces, right? It keeps time. It was chronos. And then God's time is kairos. And God exists outside of time. So there are things that happen in chronos, human time, things that happen in kairos, God's time. So I think there is an element to this. I think it's pretty blatant that there is a timing to the narrative. But do you view that? Do you see that as God's time? Or is the story more still about human time? What do you think? Say more.
Put you off and said, look, I'm not going to tell you what I want today. I'll tell you tomorrow what I want. In my time. And you know, you sit there, he's wrestling. He doesn't know what she's going to ask.
Okay.
He really doesn't know. And he's all powerful. And yet, he at her mercy then.
That's right. The power women hold over men, you know. Ain't nobody happy. Well, that's an interesting read.
I think he wants to get the next day so he can get to the banquet and find out that you can serve. You can have half my kingdom.
Yeah.
I want to know what you want.
Whatever you want, baby. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. It very well could be. It's an interesting way to read it. Maybe it really is. Other thoughts on timing? Good? I was having some fun with this. You'll notice how, of course, Haman says, who would the king want to honor more than me? This is in chapter 6, verse 6. And then, you know, Haman's like, well, this is what you should do to honor me. And I was trying to be cutesy with it a little bit on my notes. I was like, Haman asked for a horse, which is effectively a new car. You know, he asked for robes, which is effectively a new suit. You know, so he's like, I want all these things. And then he has to, yeah. He wanted a crown, yeah. Which, of course, he has to now give to Mordecai. So I wrote down, Haman is humiliated, and he wants to kill Mordecai. And Haman asks for these things, and he has to give them to Mordecai. He has to do it. Yeah. 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 So what's the significance of this? And this is kind of where we'll end, if it's okay with you all. What's the significance of this act? Either how does it help the narrative? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He is. He's a little frightened that if, like, maybe he has more power, Mordecai has more power than he thought, or more influence. I was thinking, and I could be wrong, I'm just sharing some thoughts. I'm bothered by Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those, right, who mourn. And I'm thinking of Mordecai, who just spent all of chapter 4 mourning. And here he is in God's time, finally, maybe things are turning around a little bit for him. Does that make sense? I was thinking about how also, like, you never know who you're going to run to in the future. So you should treat everyone with respect, right? And then here is Haman having to deal with the consequences of his brash pride. And it almost becomes, to me as I read it, it almost becomes a little bit of a morality tale in a sense, to say like, not what goes around comes around, but like just deserts. You reap what you sow. All these other echoes that we are aware of, and I think that Esther's trying to push some of that for us to see. What else? Anything else? Mm-hmm. I will look. Okay, go ahead. I don't know. I'll look it up. I really will. Yeah, and what I'll do is, yeah. So, I'll do some research on that, and then what I'll do as well, we'll spend a few minutes next week talking about. It'll be kind of fun if you're okay with this. I'll dig down a foot and then we'll stop. I'll talk a little bit how words are pronounced, because we will remember with great clarity that when the Hebrew was written, there were no vowels. So, Haman's name, or Haman's name, literally is spelled H-M-N. Mm-hmm. And we'll dig down a foot and we'll stop, right? So, like, King David's name is spelled D-V-D. David. What vowels do you insert there and why? And how do you know? And we have some answers, so it'll be fun to look at. And maybe I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. Yeah. Nahum? Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah. So I don't want to spend too much more time, but we'll hop into that. And I can end with this though. I do have some Hebrew memorized. If you want to hear it, I think it's interesting. It's like, oh, interesting. So the Shema is a prayer that all good Hebrews say twice a day, and it is found in Deuteronomy 6. We know it as Hero Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Which is stealing from Leviticus also. But in Hebrew, it's Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And so when you begin to hear it, I don't know, there's something about it to me. It sounds so different. It's kind of like when you hear a Spanish song in Spanish, and they translate it to English, and you go, oh, right? And vice versa, right? It's like you watch a beautiful, like, Casablanca, or, you watch something that's wonderful, and then you go to another country, and they've dubbed it, and you go, oh, blasphemy, So, I'll look that up. That'll be fun. Okay. Well, let me offer a word of prayer. I'll linger for a little bit. If you have any other questions, comments, concerns, we'll talk about that. Let's pray. Sorry, one more? Or good? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that interaction. It's been a while since I've read that interaction with Bathsheba. But we end on that note that Esther's a unique story in antiquity because we get this female protagonist. And there are a lot of times, right, where feminine voices are left on the cutting room floor. And so it's important to note, right, we always talk about this in seminary, is to ask, we always get to hear and see what voices are present, but an equally powerful question is to ask which voices are not present. And oftentimes it's women's voices who are left out of a text. And so it's a great point. There are lots of women in the Bible who feature in particular areas. All right, I'm going to offer some prayer for us. Holy God, we give you thanks for the story of Esther and what it means to us. And as we sit with it and wrestle with it and interpret it and think about what different things it might mean, what it means for us today, we pray that you would speak in the middle of all of that. Thank you for bringing everyone together here tonight and those of us online. I pray that you would grant us rest this evening. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.